The American economy is teetering on a precarious edge, but a nationwide recession won't be an equal opportunity disaster. For some states, the foundation is already crumbling. We're talking about financial reserves dipping below 5% and the average family drowning in over $45,000 of debt. Housing markets are in free fall, with property values dropping by tens of thousands of dollars in mere months. Key industries that once formed the backbone of local economies are disappearing, taking tens of thousands of jobs with them. With poverty rates climbing past 20%, the American dream is becoming a nightmare for many. When the next major downturn hits, these 10 states won't just struggle, they are positioned to collapse. The fallout will be severe, and the countdown has already begun. 10. The bluegrass state's fragile foundation. Kentucky, with its rolling hills and affordable cost of living, might appear insulated from the harsh realities of a national economic downturn. However, a closer look at its financial structure in 2025 reveals a state precariously balanced on a fragile foundation, highly susceptible to the shocks of a recession. The most glaring vulnerability lies in its fiscal preparedness, or lack thereof. The state's rainy day fund, a critical buffer designed to absorb economic blows, holds enough to cover a mere 7.6% of its annual general fund expenditures. This figure is dangerously below the 15% benchmark widely recommended by fiscal experts for maintaining stability during a crisis. Such a thin financial cushion means that any significant decline in tax revenues, an inevitable consequence of a recession, would force immediate and painful austerity measures. Essential public services, including K-12 education, higher learning institutions, and crucial healthcare programs that serve the state's most vulnerable populations, would face severe budget cuts, creating a domino effect that could cripple social infrastructure and worsen the quality of life for all residents. Beyond its shallow reserves, Kentucky's labor market is already showing signs of distress. As of early 2025, the state's unemployment rate has climbed to 5.6%, a significant jump from previous years and well above the national average of 41%. This isn't a future problem, it's a present-day crisis unfolding before a major recession has even been declared. This rising joblessness is compounded by a deeply entrenched poverty problem. Nearly 18% of Kentuckians live below the poverty line, a stark contrast to the national rate of 11.4%. This means that nearly 1 out of every 5 households is already struggling to afford basic necessities, even during periods of relative economic calm. When a recession hits, this financially fragile population will have no safety net, leading to a rapid increase in housing insecurity, food instability, and reliance on already strained social support systems. The state's economic engine is another source of concern. Kentucky's GDP contracted by 0.7% in the first quarter of 2025, an alarming signal that its core industries are faltering. Its heavy reliance on manufacturing, coal, and agriculture makes it particularly vulnerable. These sectors are notoriously cyclical and are often the first to suffer during economic slowdowns as consumer demand for goods wanes and global trade contracts. The decline of the coal industry, for example, has already had a devastating impact, with state revenue from coal taxes plummeting by 22% year over year. This not only eliminates jobs but also erodes a key source of public funding, further weakening the state's ability to respond to a crisis. The housing market, while more modest with a median home price of $213,000, is also beginning to falter, with values declining in key urban centers like Louisville and across the rural eastern part of the state. For many families, home equity is their primary source of wealth. A continued drop in prices could push thousands of homeowners underwater, where they owe more on their mortgage than their property is worth, leading to a wave of foreclosures and further destabilizing communities. With its combination of insufficient financial reserves, a weak labor market, high poverty, and an economy dependent on declining industries, Kentucky is structurally unprepared for a major recession. Rhode Island may be the smallest state in the Union, but it is facing an outsized collection of economic risks that could make it one of the first to buckle under the pressure of a national recession. Its size, which translates to a limited population of just over 1.09 million people, creates a narrow tax base and a lack of industrial diversity. This leaves the state's economy dangerously exposed to downturns in its key sectors. The state's fiscal health is a primary concern. In 2025, Rhode Island's rainy day fund contains only enough to cover 6.9% of its annual spending. This is far below the national median of 10.3% and provides a perilously thin margin for error. When a recession hits and tax receipts from income and sales inevitably fall, the state government will have very little time and few resources to prevent a fiscal crisis, forcing drastic cuts to public services that its residents depend on. This lack of a financial buffer is especially troubling given the clear signs of weakness already present in its economy. The job market in Rhode Island is deteriorating at an alarming rate. The unemployment rate surged to 5.4% in early 2025, a dramatic increase from 3.6% just 12 months prior. This spike reflects significant job losses in healthcare and tourism, two pillars of the state's economy that are highly sensitive to shifts in consumer spending and travel patterns. As households tighten their budgets during a recession, these sectors are likely to face even greater declines, pushing unemployment figures higher and depressing wage growth. This employment uncertainty is happening against a backdrop of stagnant economic growth, with the state's GDP showing no expansion in the first quarter of 2025, signaling that a contraction is likely already underway. Compounding these issues is a severe housing affordability crisis. The median home price has climbed to $46,000, a figure that is increasingly disconnected from the financial reality of most residents. With a median household income of $46,000, the price-to-income ratio is far outside the bounds of what is considered sustainable, putting homeownership out of reach for a large portion of the population. This high cost of living extends beyond housing, putting immense pressure on household budgets. As a result, consumer debt has spiraled to alarming levels. The average Rhode Islander carries approximately $41,700 in personal debt, and delinquencies on credit cards are on the rise. This indicates that many families are living on the financial edge, with little to no savings to weather a job loss or unexpected expense. A recession would undoubtedly trigger a wave of personal bankruptcies and defaults, creating a vicious cycle of economic distress. Adding another layer of risk is the state's poorly funded pension system, which ranks among the worst in the nation. This long-term liability acts as a fiscal time bomb. A severe recession would decimate the investment returns that the pension fund relies on, forcing the state to divert even more of its shrinking general fund to cover its obligations to retirees, further crowding out spending on education, infrastructure, and public safety. With its high cost of living, a fragile job market concentrated in vulnerable sectors, insufficient fiscal reserves, and a looming pension crisis, Rhode Island is facing a perfect storm. 8. The Gem State's growth bubble burst. For years, Idaho was the poster child for explosive growth, attracting new residents with its scenic beauty and the promise of a better quality of life. The state's population swelled to over 1.95 million, an increase of nearly 18% since 2015. But in 2025, the very engine of that boom, a red-hot housing market, has become a massive liability, transforming Idaho's success story into a cautionary tale of a bubble on the verge of bursting. The rapid influx of people fueled a speculative frenzy in real estate, particularly in the Boise metropolitan area. The median home price in the capital city soared to $83,000 in early 2024, nearly doubling from 2019 level. This unsustainable surge created an affordability crisis and laid the groundwork for a painful correction. Now, that correction is here. With housing inventory in the Boise area up 28% year over year, the market is flooded with properties that fewer people can afford. Prices are falling, leaving many recent home buyers trapped in homes that are worth less than their mortgages. These individuals who stretched their finances to buy at the peak now face the grim prospect of selling at a significant loss or facing foreclosure. This deflating housing bubble is sending shockwaves through Idaho's economy, which has become heavily dependent on real estate, construction, and related services. As the construction boom slows and home sales decline, job losses are beginning to mount. The state's unemployment rate, while still relatively low at 3.9%, has started a noticeable upward trend, driven by layoffs in the tech and construction sector. These industries, along with agriculture, form the trifecta of Idaho's economy, and all three are highly susceptible to recessionary pressure. A national downturn will reduce demand for technology products, depress agricultural commodity prices, and bring the already slowing construction industry to a grinding halt. This concentration of risk in cyclical industries is a major vulnerability that the state's rapid growth has masked until now. An even more pressing danger is Idaho's shocking lack of fiscal preparation. The state's rainy day fund covers a mere 6.1% of its annual spending, placing it among the 10 worst prepared states in the nation. This fiscal imprudence means that when the recession fully takes hold and tax revenues from property, sales, and income plummet, the state will have almost no ability to cushion the blow. Essential services like schools, road maintenance, and first responders will face immediate and severe funding shortages, disrupting daily life and exacerbating the economic pain for its residents. The financial strain on Idaho's households is already immense. The average household carries over $37,200 in consumer debt, and more than 22% of households are considered housing cost burdened, spending over 30% of their income on shelter. With high inflation and stagnant wages, these families have no financial cushion. A single job loss can be catastrophic, pushing them toward bankruptcy. The state's overall economic momentum has stalled, with GDP growing by a negligible 0.5% in the first quarter of 2025. Idaho's period of unprecedented expansion has left it dangerously exposed. The combination of an overbuilt and deflating housing market, an economy concentrated in recession-prone sectors, and critically low financial reserves has set the stage for a rapid and severe collapse. For years, Arizona has been the embodiment of the new American West, a sun-drenched haven attracting a steady stream of new residents, from retirees and remote workers to families seeking opportunity. With a population surging to 7.4 million, its growth has been undeniable. But by 2025, this rapid expansion has stretched the state's economic fabric to its breaking point, creating a volatile mix of housing inflation, rising inequality, and a service-based economy that is dangerously unprepared for a recession. The foundation of Arizona's vulnerability is its overheated and inaccessible housing market. The median home price has soared to $424,000 statewide, but in desirable urban centers like Phoenix and Scottsdale, that figure easily surpasses 500. This meteoric rise has far outpaced wage growth, with the median household income lagging at just 7. This immense gap has created a severe affordability crisis, forcing a staggering 31% of Arizona households into a housing burden status where they must dedicate more than 30% of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. This leaves families with minimal disposable income and virtually no capacity to save, making them acutely sensitive to any economic shock. The influx of cash buyers and investors during the boom years has now left a legacy of over-leveraged homeowners and a market ripe for a painful correction. Compounding this housing crisis is a shocking lack of fiscal foresight at the state level. Arizona's rainy day fund holds just enough to cover a meager 5.8% of its general budget, a figure that is alarmingly short of the 15% safety net recommended by fiscal experts. This fiscal irresponsibility means that when a recession hits and tax revenues from sales and income inevitably plummet, the state will have almost no runway to sustain essential public services. Schools, healthcare facilities, and infrastructure projects will face immediate and draconian budget cuts, amplifying the economic hardship for its citizens. The state's job market is already flashing clear warning signs. The unemployment rate has climbed to 5.8% as of the second quarter of 2025, with significant layoffs already hitting the key sectors of tourism, retail, and construction. The very industries that fueled Arizona's growth. Between January and May alone, the Phoenix metropolitan area shed over 19,000 jobs, a clear indication that the slowdown is not a distant threat, but a present reality. The state's GDP confirmed this trend by shrinking 0.9% in the first quarter, signaling that the economic engine is already sputtering. Furthermore, Arizona households are drowning in debt. The consumer debt per capita has reached an eye-watering $43,500, accompanied by a sharp rise in delinquencies on credit cards and auto loans. Many who moved from more expensive states like California in search of affordability are now discovering that they have traded one precarious situation for another. With its fragile fiscal position, an inflated housing market on the brink of collapse, and a service-heavy economy shedding jobs, Arizona's sun-soaked promise is rapidly becoming a mirage. Nevada's economy has always been a high-stakes gamble, built on the glitz and glamour of industries that thrive on discretionary spending. In 2025, however, the state is facing a losing hand as the odds turn sharply against it. With a population of 3.2 million, Nevada's fortunes are inextricably tied to gaming, tourism, and hospitality. These sectors are the first to suffer when consumers get nervous and tighten their belts, making the entire state exceptionally vulnerable to the slightest economic tremor. Even before a full-blown recession has been declared, the fallout is already visible. Las Vegas, the state's economic heart, has seen a 13% drop in tourism revenue. Hotel bookings are down, major conventions are being canceled, and the once bustling strip is showing signs of strain. This is not just a temporary dip, it is a fundamental crack in the state's economic foundation. Because gaming and sales taxes account for over 60% of state revenue, this downturn in tourism will create a catastrophic fiscal domino effect, starving the government of the funds it needs to operate. This economic fragility is matched by an even more alarming lack of financial preparedness. Nevada's rainy day fund is one of the most underfunded in the nation, covering a terrifyingly low 5.1% of its annual budget. This leaves the state with virtually no cushion to absorb the fiscal shock of a recession. As tax revenues evaporate, Nevada will have little capacity to fund unemployment benefits for its growing number of jobless citizens or maintain basic public services without massive and immediate cuts. The labor market is already in a state of crisis. The unemployment rate has surged to 6%, with Las Vegas losing 22,000 jobs in the first 4 months of 2020. These losses have been concentrated in the hotels, casinos, and entertainment venues that are the lifeblood of the local economy. The housing market, which experienced a speculative frenzy fueled by pandemic-era investors, is now in freefall. The median home price stands at $38,000. But in Las Vegas, prices have already plunged 7% year over year. Spooked investors are rushing for the exits, causing housing inventory to swell by 34% compared to the previous year. This market collapse has trapped a significant portion of the population, with nearly 19% of homeowners in the Las Vegas metro area now finding themselves underwater, owing more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. This wave of negative equity is a precursor to a surge in foreclosures. Meanwhile, Nevada households are buried under an average of $45,200 in consumer debt, and delinquency rates on car payments and credit cards have climbed 2.3% in just 6 months. With an economy dangerously over-reliant on volatile industries, virtually no fiscal reserves, and a collapsing housing market, Nevada is a house of cards in a hurricane. Indiana, often called the crossroads of America, represents the industrial heartland of the nation. But in 2025, its deep-rooted dependence on manufacturing is proving to be a critical weakness, pushing the state's economy toward a breaking point. With a population of 85 million, Indiana's economic health is overwhelmingly tied to the fate of its factories, particularly those producing automobiles, steel, and heavy machinery. These industries are highly cyclical and are already being battered by a perfect storm of reduced consumer demand, high interest rates that deter large purchases, and persistent global supply chain disruptions. The damage is not hypothetical, it's already being measured. The state's GDP shrank by a concerning 1.1% in the first quarter of 2025, while factory output has plummeted by 6.7% year over year. These are not signs of a slowdown, but of an industrial sector in active retreat. This industrial decline is translating directly into job losses and economic hardship for Indiana's workforce. The unemployment rate has jumped to 5 with over 42,000 jobs vanishing in the first half of the year alone. Major manufacturing hubs like Elkhart and Fort Wayne are seeing a wave of rolling layoffs as factory orders dry up, and the state's overall workforce participation rate has fallen to 60.8%. A low not seen in over a decade. This rising unemployment is particularly devastating in a state where wages are already low. The median household income is just $63,000, leaving families with very little financial buffer to withstand a period of joblessness. This lack of financial security is reflected in soaring debt levels. The average household is now shouldering over $41,000 in consumer debt, a sharp 12% increase since 2022. As families increasingly rely on credit to make ends meet. Adding to this precarious situation is the state's thin fiscal safety net. Indiana's rainy day fund holds only enough to cover 6.4% of its expenditures, an insufficient amount to weather a prolonged economic storm. Unlike some of its neighbors, Indiana has historically underinvested in its social support system. It ranks near the bottom of all states at 45th in per capita public health spending, and its unemployment insurance program offers some of the most limited benefits in the country. This means that when workers lose their jobs, they will receive less support for a shorter period. accelerating their descent into financial crisis. The housing market, though seemingly affordable with a median price of $246,000, is also showing signs of distress. Major cities like Indianapolis and Gary are seeing a rise in vacancies and homes lingering on the market for longer. More worryingly, evictions are up 22% compared to the previous year, hitting the 33% of the population who rent particularly hard as their stagnant wages fail to keep up with costs. In a state where manufacturing is king, the belts are stopping. With its thin financial reserves and weak social safety net, there is little to stop Indiana's fall. Decade 4. The Palmetto State's unstable boom. On the surface, South Carolina projects an image of southern charm and booming prosperity. With a population that has swelled to 5.4 million, it has successfully attracted a wave of retirees, remote workers, and families from other states, all drawn by its warm climate and perceived affordability. However, this rapid, unchecked growth has created a precarious economic structure, stretching public resources thin and inflating a housing bubble that is now poised to burst. The state's economic foundation, heavily reliant on tourism and real estate, is far shakier than its gleaming new developments suggest. The most immediate threat is the widening chasm between housing costs and local incomes. The median home price in South Carolina has exploded to $88,000, a staggering 52% increase since 2019. This surge has dramatically outpaced wage growth, with the median household income stagnating at just $63,900. This creates an unsustainable affordability gap, where nearly 29% of homeowners and a shocking 42% of renters are now officially cost-burdened, forced to spend over 30% of their income on housing alone. This leaves a massive portion of the population with little to no disposable income for savings, emergencies, or even basic goods, making them acutely vulnerable to a recessionary shock. The twin engines of South Carolina's recent growth, tourism and real estate development, are already sputtering in GDP growth has ground to a near halt, registering a mere 0.2% in the first quarter. In coastal hubs like Charleston and Myrtle Beach, tourism revenue has fallen by 11% year-over-year as discretionary spending tightens. The construction boom is also reversing course, with new project starts dropping by 18%, a clear signal that developers are hitting the brakes in anticipation of a downturn. This slowdown in its key industries is especially dangerous given the state's weak fiscal position. South Carolina's rainy day fund is critically underfunded, covering only 6% of its annual expenditures, well below the national average and the amount needed to weather a serious economic crisis. This lack of a financial cushion means that as tax revenues from tourism and property sales dry up, the state will be forced to make immediate and painful cuts. Public services, which are already under-resourced, will be on the chopping block. South Carolina ranks 44th in the nation for K-12 education spending and 47th for healthcare access, indicating a fragile social support system that is ill-equipped to handle the surge in demand that a recession would bring. Job losses are already accelerating, with the unemployment rate climbing to 5.7%. Over 38,000 jobs were lost in the first 4 months of 2025, primarily in the vulnerable hospitality, construction, and retail sectors. At the same time, household debt is piling up, now averaging $43,800, while credit card delinquencies have risen 2.6% in the last year. South Carolina's growth was built on a foundation of volatile industries and low-wage jobs, and with little in the way of financial reserves, the Palmetto State is dangerously exposed to a rapid economic unraveling. 3. An economy already on life support. Mississippi has long struggled with deep-seated economic challenges, consistently ranking at or near the bottom of national metrics for financial health and well-being. In 2025, the state is not just vulnerable to a recession, it is already in a state of crisis, teetering on the edge of a full-scale collapse. With a population of 2.9 million, Mississippi holds the unenviable title of having the highest poverty rate in America. At 19.9%, nearly 1 in every 5 residents lives below the poverty line, a grim reality that exists even before the onset of a major national downturn. This widespread pre-existing financial fragility means a huge portion of the population has absolutely no buffer to absorb the impact of job losses or rising costs. guaranteeing that a recession will be catastrophic for its communities. The state government is in a similarly dire position. Mississippi's rainy day fund is one of the most depleted in the country, covering a mere 5.2% of its annual budget. This leaves the state with almost no fiscal capacity to respond to a crisis. When a recession hits and tax revenues crater, the government will be unable to fund essential services or provide a meaningful safety net for its citizens without immediate and devastating cuts. The economic indicators are already flashing bright red across the board. The state's GDP shrank by 1% in the first quarter of 2025, a contraction driven by weakness in its core industries of agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare. The job market is deteriorating rapidly, with unemployment climbing to 6%. Significant job losses are hitting urban centers like Jackson and Tupelo, as well as the historically impoverished Mississippi Delta region. Compounding the crisis is a failing social and physical infrastructure. Rural hospitals are closing at an alarming pace, creating healthcare deserts and stripping away one of the few remaining sources of stable employment in many communities. The state ranks 49th in healthcare access and 50th in education funding, crippling its ability to foster a healthy, skilled workforce capable of long-term recovery. While the median home price of $144,000 seems low, it is dangerously high relative to the state's median household income of just $5,000. A significant number of residents are stretched thin, with over 34% reporting housing cost burdens, a problem exacerbated by soaring energy and insurance costs. To cope, households have taken on an average of $38,200 in credit card debt. Meanwhile, the state's physical infrastructure is literally crumbling. Over 1,000 bridges are structurally deficient, and the ongoing water system crisis in the capital city of Jackson is a national symbol of public failure. A recession would halt any hope of funding these critical repairs, pushing the state further into decay. With systemic poverty, non-existent fiscal reserves, a contracting economy, and failing infrastructure, Mississippi is an economy already on life support. 2. The Centennial State's altitude sickness. For the better part of a decade, Colorado was the shining star of American economic growth, a magnet for ambitious millennials and tech startups drawn to its stunning landscapes and dynamic economy. But in 2025, that rapid ascent has led to a severe case of economic altitude sickness. The state's success has bred unsustainable levels of housing inflation, debt, and inequality, transforming its growth story into a cautionary tale. Colorado's rainy day fund, at just 5.9% of annual expenditures, is woefully inadequate for a state of its size and is far below the level needed to cushion the blow of a serious recession. This fiscal oversight is particularly dangerous given that much of its recent prosperity has been built on a speculative real estate boom that is now showing deep cracks. The housing market has become completely detached from the reality of local wages. The median home price in the Denver metro area has reached a staggering $61,000, while the statewide median sits at $107,000. Even with a respectable median household income of $84,000, the cost of living is overwhelming. A massive 37% of homeowners are cost-burdened, while renters have been crushed by a 28% surge in rental prices in just 2 years. This has pushed the dream of homeownership out of reach for many and left a large portion of the population financially overextended and vulnerable. The state's diverse economy is no longer a shield. The job market is softening, with unemployment rising to 4% as layoffs ripple through the previously booming tech, construction, and tourism sectors. Colorado's GDP contracted by 6% in the first quarter, a clear sign that the economic engine is reversing. Experts warn that two other pillars of its economy, energy and outdoor recreation, are also highly sensitive to economic downturns as both industrial and consumer spending decline. This job insecurity is amplified by an enormous mountain of personal debt. The average Colorado household is saddled with $48,900 in consumer debt, and credit card delinquencies have jumped 3. Many of the young professionals who flock to cities like Boulder and Fort Collins are now trapped by the high cost of living, stagnant wages, and dwindling job prospects. The strain is also showing in the state's social fabric. Despite its wealthy image, Colorado ranks a dismal 42nd in per-student education funding, and the homeless population has swelled by 21% statewide. The combination of low fiscal reserves, a housing market stretched to its absolute limit, and widening economic inequality has put Colorado on a path toward a harsh reckoning. The Centennial State is no longer just slowing down, it is facing a potential crash, and this time its majestic mountains will offer no protection from the economic fallout. The Bayou State, on the brink of system failure. Louisiana stands alone at the top of the list of states most likely to collapse, facing a confluence of catastrophic risks that no other state can match. For years, it has been plagued by systemic issues, but in 2025, it is staring into the abyss of a complete system failure. With a population of 4.6 million, the state is being crushed by a perfect storm of extreme poverty, crumbling infrastructure, a contracting industrial base, and a government with virtually no financial capacity to respond. The most critical vulnerability is Louisiana's fiscal health or complete lack thereof. The state's rainy day fund covers a microscopic 4.3% of its annual expenditures, the absolute worst in the nation. This isn't just a small buffer, it's a fiscal vacuum. It is barely enough to keep the lights on for a few weeks if a recession causes tax revenues to tank, guaranteeing that any significant economic shock will lead to the immediate paralysis of public services. The state's economy is already in a freefall. Louisiana's GDP plunged by 4% in the first quarter of 2025, one of the most severe contractions in the country. This was driven by falling energy prices and a dramatic slowdown in offshore drilling, gutting the oil and gas sector that has long been the state's primary economic engine. The devastation is being felt acutely by its workforce. Unemployment has skyrocketed to 6%, with more than 54,000 jobs disappearing since the start of the year. The state's key industries, energy, tourism, and shipping are all in retreat. New Orleans has lost 15% of its vital hospitality workforce, while in Baton Rouge, construction has been halted on over 60 major commercial projects. This economic collapse is unfolding in a state already defined by extreme poverty. The median household income is a meager $54,000, but in many rural parishes, that figure drops below $40,000.